The summer of 1947 had a particular heaviness in the air at Dovetail Ridge, Georgia, a blend of pine resin and warm clay baking under a relentless sun. Time didn't tick there. It yawned and stretched, slow and deliberate, as if the entire town was stuck between breaths. Cicadas hummed like broken clocks, and the stillness of the place was the kind that got under your skin. That's when Warner Rhodes arrived, in the back of a truck coated in red dust, a scuffed suitcase on his lap and something even heavier pressed behind his ribs. Grief. 38 and newly widowed, he'd left Charleston behind the house, the memories, the smell of his wife's perfume still soaked into the curtains, all of it too loud for a man who only wanted quiet. He wasn't looking for second chances, just quiet rooms, unanswered questions, a place where no one asked about the past. But Dovetail Ridge had a peculiar habit of offering more than what was asked for. The town was no more than a cluster of essentials, a chapel, a general store, and a market square that came alive once a week, like a heartbeat pulsing through a sleeping body. That's where he saw her, not like a lightning bolt, but like a memory you're sure you never had. Her name was Eta Mae. She stood behind a Laskovid store, rows of glistening jars lined in perfect symmetry, peach preserves, blackberry jam, maybe a whisper of something. Older, a green dress clung gently to her frame, soft white gloves buttoned at the wrists, and a straw hat crowned with a single yellow rose tilted just so. Her skin glowed like tea with too much honey, and her eyes a peculiar shade between gray and storm held stillness like a secret dot. It wasn't her beauty that stopped Warner cold. It was her quiet. Everyone else moved like they were racing the sun. She stood like time paused just for her. He didn't believe in love at first sight, not until that day. Their first conversation was disarmingly ordinary. "Are these homemade?" he asked, nodding at the preserves. "My mother's recipe," she said. Her voice was warm and slow, like syrup melting on warm bread. "Each jar holds a memory." He bought 2 just to be polite, he told himself. A week later, he came back for 4. By the 3rd week, he stopped pretending he was there for jam, lingered near her booth with clumsy excuses. "Think it'll rain this weekend? How's the harvest look? Heard the chapel bell was off by a minute this morning." She'd answer softly, smile politely, but she never asked questions, not about him, and never about herself, not her family, not her home, not her childhood. But Warner didn't mind. Some people wear silence like armor. Eta Mae wore it like perfume. By August, they were sharing supper on his porch swing almost nightly. She'd arrive with bundles of cornbread and fried green tomatoes wrapped in brown paper, settling into the swing while the sun dipped behind the pecan trees. Warner would talk about Charleston, about his wife and the slow death that tore his world apart, about how he once dreamed of planting a garden. She didn't offer sympathy, just her presence. And somehow, that was more. Sometimes she hummed while he spoke, a melody he didn't recognize but came to crave like sleep. After sorrow, he wrote to a cousin in Savannah, "I've never met someone so quiet who makes the world so loud inside my chest." People in town noticed the change. Warner smiled more, walked with his shoulders back, started sweeping his porch at dawn and tipping his hat to every neighbor. Folks said Eta Mae was good for him, but most admitted they didn't know her too well. She was kind, certainly, but private. Lived alone on the outskirts in her family's old farmhouse, a place no one had set foot in for years. Dropped into the world like a ghost. The preacher's wife said, "No past, just presence." But Warner didn't care. Whatever shadows she carried, they weren't heavier than his own. So, on the final Sunday of September, as the market closed and stalls folded like dreams into silence, he asked her to marry him right beneath the big sycamore that shaded her jars all summer long. She didn't gasp, didn't smile, just looked at him, those calm eyes holding something he couldn't read. "Yes," she said softly, "but you must promise never ask about before." It was strange, but it felt right, somehow, like a lock clicking into a door he hadn't meant to open. He promised. 2 weeks later, they were married in the chapel by Reverend Clancy. No fanfare, no veil, just a cream dress for her and a suit that barely fit for him. The whole town showed up. Eta Mae kissed his cheek after the vows and whispered, "You've given me peace I never knew I needed." Warner believed her. He didn't know was that she had spoken those very words before, to someone else, and he didn't yet understand the danger hidden in stillness, that sometimes silence isn't peace at all. Sometimes it's a warning dressed in Sunday clothes, and sweetened with jam. A week after the wedding, Eta Mae moved into Warner's cottage, a weathered 2-bedroom that crouched between forgotten cotton fields and old pecan trees. The house had always felt too wide, too quiet, a kind of echo chamber for sorrow, but with Eta there, filling cupboards with glass jars and humming low while arranging dried herbs in the pantry. The house softened, as if it too was trying to heal. Warner tried not to think about how quickly she adjusted. She slipped into his routines like she had written them herself. The porch swing creaked the same, but it felt warmer now. She brought laughter in odd places, in burnt biscuits, in awkward dances beneath the kitchen lamp, but there was a curious note just beneath the melody of their life together, something faint, something off-key. It began with a request over breakfast one morning: tea, steeping toast, cooling. ATA glanced up and said, "I'd like to keep my old house." Warner blinked. "Not sell it." "No," she said, eyes fixed on her plate as she spread peach preserves onto the toast. "Just for storage. My mother's canning tools, a few heirlooms, nothing worth partying with." Her voice was casual, but her tone was final. She never looked up from the toast. Warner nodded, forcing a smile. He didn't push. Why would he? The farmhouse was hers by inheritance. Everyone in town knew it, a sagging blue structure nestled at the end of Pinewood Road, half swallowed by thickets and time. Folks said no one had visited the place in years, maybe decades. Just Eta, alone, always alone. Still, a month into their marriage, Warner offered to help her move some boxes. "Of course, darling," she said, after a brief pause, a smile stretched thin but polite. They drove in silence. The road snaked through sun-drenched woods, past broken fences and crumbling mailboxes. Ita wore her gloves even in the heat, hands resting still on her lap like folded secrets. Warner noticed how rigid they looked, how unnaturally still. The farmhouse hadn't changed. The shutters had faded to a whisper of blue, and the porch sagged like it was tired of holding up stories. As they stepped inside, dust rose like ash. The air was thick, with a smell Warner couldn't name, faintly sour, faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. He didn't ask. The tour was brief. She moved ahead of him with purpose, pointing out what could be packed and what would stay. The living room was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, and a pair of old paintings on the wall. One was a river, the other, a woman with no face. Warner lingered on that one. "What's this room?" he asked when they passed a door bolted with an old iron lock. Eta didn't turn around. "Cellar," she replied. "Used to get rats. Smells like something died down there. Probably did." She gave a little laugh, sharp and dry. "Don't worry, I've taken care of it." She handed him 2 boxes from a back room, linens, chipped porcelain, a photo frame without a photo, and that was it. 15 minutes later, they were back in the car. Eta chatted on the drive home about planting lemon balm near the porch. Warner tried to nod, tried to smile, but his mind stayed with that bolted door. Not the smell, not even the lock. It was the way she spoke about it, like she'd practiced. The line like the door wasn't just shut, but guarding something. That night he dreamed of stairs that led downward forever, of breath that wasn't his own echoing in the dark. When he woke, Eta lay beside him, turned away. Her breathing was slow, too slow. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the weeks that followed, Warner made excuses for the unease, the flickers of doubt. The house was old. Of course there were smells. Of course there was a lock. Rats were a problem in towns like Dovetail Ridge, right? But small things began to whisper otherwise. One morning, while folding laundry, he found a fine powder inside one of her gloves, pale gray, coarser than dust, softer than dirt. Another day, a streak of blood on her apron. She said she'd nicked herself slicing beets. The cut wasn't visible. He started keeping a notebook, not filled with accusations, just observations. "She stares too long at knives. Never lets me go barefoot in the house. Says it's bad for circulation. Keeps root cellar locked. Says it's for temperature control." He wasn't afraid, not yet, just cautious, like standing too close to a river that might be deeper than it looks. One Thursday, while Eta was in town delivering preserves, Warner returned to the farmhouse alone. The copy of the key he'd secretly made shook in his hand as he turned it in the lock. The cellar door groaned open like something exhaling. The air that rose was thick, damp, and colder than the world above. He descended slowly, flashlight in one hand, heart in the other. The cellar was quiet, too quiet, the kind that hums behind your ears. Shelves lined the walls, packed with jars, some filled with jam, others filled with he didn't know, things suspended in syrup, shapes hard to define. The room was organized with care, like a shrine. And in the far corner, a butcher's table, clean but stained beneath a tarp nearby. He found a small pile of clothes, a child's shoe, a man's belt, a woman's shawl. His knees gave way, his breath stopped. Then he saw the wall, Names were scratched into the brick, crude, jagged, frantic. Names he recognized. Names he did in single quotes to Dad. He left everything as it was. Didn't touch a thing. That night he sat across the kitchen from Ada May as she sliced peaches. Her blade moved rhythmically. Her lips hummed that same old tune. She looked up and smiled. He smiled back. But something in her eyes had shifted. Or maybe something in his had. Something had been unsealed. That night, Warner dreamed again. A red apron, a cellar door swinging open, and a voice, sweet and soft, whispering up from the dark. Don't ask about before. 3 months into the marriage, Warner Rhodes began to understand that silence wasn't just something Ada May lived with, it was something she wielded. There weren't just gaps in her stories. There were whole caverns, the kind you don't notice at first because they're so carefully avoided, danced around with quiet grace. But once you see them, they echoed. That it wasn't just that Ita never spoke of her childhood, it was that it felt like her past had been carefully erased. No laughter about girlhood friends. No tales of sneaking pie from her mama's window. Hints of schoolyard mischief. Warner could never quite imagine a younger Ita running barefoot through cotton rows. She lived like she had emerged fully formed, mysterious, elegant, slightly chilled by time. Still, Warner wasn't the kind to pry. He loved her the way he'd love an old book, softly, without trying to rewrite it. But some books whisper when you sleep. One night, the air was thick with dusk and honeysuckle, and the two of them sat on the porch swing, watching the last fireflies blink against the coming dark. Warner had poured them both glasses of elderflower cordial, the clinking of ice the only sound for several minutes. Then gently, too gently, he asked, "Did your folks pass a long time ago, Ita?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed on the tree line, watching the shadows stretch longer across the field. When she finally spoke, her voice was still, controlled. "They all died," she said. "Mama, Papa, my sisters. The Lord took them one by one." Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes shimmered just slightly, as if trying to remember how to cry. "I'm sorry," Warner said, reaching for her hand. She nodded once, then stood, and walked inside without another word. That was the first and last time she mentioned them. No names, no dates, just absence. Still, the town remembered, or tried to. Miss Dayler Overy, the preacher's wife, had lived in Dovetail Ridge her entire life. She remembered Ada May as a girl, remembered the way her eyes looked older than her face, and she remembered something else too, something she whispered to Warner one Sunday after church, her gloved fingers clutching her hymnal a little too tightly. "I remember the gloves," she said. She started wearing them when she was 13. After the bonfire, Warner blinked. Bonfire. Della's voice dropped. Summer of 35. The night sky cracked open like judgment. Thunder so loud it rattled the windows. And her family. Farmhouse, it glowed, like lanterns in every room. Long past midnight, I heard, screaming from the ridge. Warner stiffened. Were they fighting? They weren't fighting, Mr. Rhodes. They were dying. Della's voice turned to stone. And you know what's strange? There were no funerals. Not one. They just stopped being seen. Warner forced a chuckle, like it was all some spooky tale. "Maybe they moved." To where, she asked, deadpan. Ada never left, and her garden got real green after that summer, real fast. That night, Warner lay awake while Ada slept beside him, one hand lightly resting on his chest, as if anchoring him to her dreams. But all he could think about was that glowing house, the unspoken family, and the sudden hush that had blanketed her past like fog over gravestones. He remembered the strange names carved into the cellar wall. He remembered the padlock, thick as a jailer's hand, and the way she'd paused just barely when he'd asked about her sisters. A week later, Warner visited the municipal archives, a one-room office tucked behind the mayor's house, more dust than books. The clerk, a young man with oversized spectacles, handed over a thick ledger and went back to his crossword. Warner flipped through brittle pages. Langley, there, Josiah Langley, Evelyn Langley, Maybeth Langley, father, mother, younger sister, birth. Records were there, but nothing else. No death certificates, no obituaries in the town ledger, no cemetery listings. As if they hadn't died, as if they'd just evaporated. He walked out into the Georgia heat feeling cold. When he returned home, Ita greeted him like nothing had changed, with blackberry pie cooling on the windowsill and a kiss soft as sleep. She wore a new apron, dark green with little embroidered violets. She hummed a song he didn't know. He smiled, ate the pie, but his eyes never left her hands. The way they moved with such practiced rhythm while slicing berries. The way her gaze dropped just slightly every time the topic veered to Wartown history. That week, Warner began walking the property at night. Not far, just to the edge of the garden, there was one patch he always noticed beneath the old magnolia. She never tended it, never watered it, and yet it stayed moist, even during July's brutal drought. The soil there felt warm. Not sun-warm, heart-warm. One night, as he watched from the attic window, Ada knelt at that patch, not gardening, just resting her hand on the earth, motionless, reverent. That patch never dried, never cracked. Once, when she wasn't looking, Warner pressed his own hand into it. The soil pulsed beneath his fingers. After that, he stopped sleeping again. He started hiding notes behind loose floorboards, in hollow bedposts, beneath the pantry shelves. Not just suspicions, questions. Francine Wells. Found her name in the school records. No mention since 1936. Why did her uncle stop visiting after 36? What's in the locked chest in the root cellar? Why does she never eat her own pies? He never accused, never confronted, because something had become clear to him. Ita May didn't just carry silence, she taught it. She made it a condition of survival. If he wanted to stay alive, he had to learn to speak her language. The day was soaked in rain when Warner returned to the farmhouse. Ada was away delivering preserves in town, and the grey sky offered cover. His breath fogged on the windshield as he parked beneath the sagging pecan tree out front. The house waited like it had been holding its breath for years. He had come with a copy of the cellar key, one she didn't know he'd made. The storm rolled in slow and thick, thunder crawling over the hills. Warner clutched a flashlight and a crowbar. As he stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open without resistance. Inside, everything looked the same. Shelves of canned peaches, stacks of flour sacks, herbs hanging in dry bouquets from the ceiling. And yet the silence wasn't the same. It pushed against his ears like cotton, still too deep. At the cellar door stood at the end of the hall like a sealed mouth. He inserted the key. It turned with a reluctant click. The air behind the door was colder than it should have been, damp like something had been crying in the walls. Warner held the flashlight tight as he descended the narrow stairs. Each creak beneath his boots sounded like a question he wasn't ready to answer. What met him at the bottom was unexpected. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't filth. It was order. Deep, careful order. Shelves lined the walls in perfect symmetry. Labeled jars glimmered under the flashlight beam. Some contained jams, others he didn't know. Suspended contents in syrup, textures that didn't belong in kitchens, bones, roots, something else. In the center, an old butcher's table stood like an altar. Clean, but stained. It was the barrel in the corner that drew him, the only thing out of place. Wood swollen from moisture, the metal bands rusted and groaning. Warner moved toward it, heart thudding, breath shallow. The smell met him before he touched it, sour and metallic, clinging to the back of his throat. He wedged the crowbar beneath the lid and pried it loose. The air shifted. A fermented stench billowed out like spoiled vinegar with a floral twist. His stomach turned. He staggered back, covering his mouth. Inside, bones. Small. Deliberately arranged. A child, maybe a teenager, nestled in the center. Something metal glinted. He reached in, hand shaking, and pulled it free. A bracelet, dulled by time. Engraved in soft cursive. Francine. He dropped it, fell to his knees, vomited into the dust. He thought of the photograph, the grinning girl beside young Ada May. Thought of the preacher's wife. They weren't fighting, they were dying. When he stood, he noticed a carving in the beam above the barrel, barely visible. But under the right angle of light, it read, "Meet his memory." The phrase was strange, but something about it chilled him more than anything else. He remembered the summer stews, the meat pies, the special sausages, the jars gifted to neighbors during harvest festivals. The smile on Ada's lips when she served him. The soft way she'd touch his shoulder and ask, "Do you like the flavor, love?" He looked again at the bracelet, at the bones, and he knew this was only one barrel. He ran, didn't close the lid, didn't look back. He burst into the storm outside, rain hammering his face. The ground slipped beneath him like it too had grown tired of keeping secrets. Back home, he locked every door, checked every window, sat at the kitchen table with a shotgun across his lap. He didn't sleep, not that night. The next morning, Ita returned. She walked in with a breeze and a humming tune, kissed his cheek, set fresh bread on the table. She wore a new apron, embroidered violets on dark green. He smiled, ate what she offered. But now, he watched everything. The way her eyes lingered too long on the bread knife, the way she stirred her tea counterclockwise, the way she never tasted the food she served. That night, he rinsed his face in the kitchen sink and something caught his eye. Beneath the counter, the wooden paneling looked disturbed, one corner uneven like it had been removed, then carefully replaced. He knelt. There was a latch, a hidden drawer. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, sat a small leather-bound notebook, stained, smoky. Warner opened it slowly, his fingers no longer steady. No recipes, no measurements, just names. Francine, soft, tender, smoked. Each page was a twisted tasting note, a ledger of the consumed, an archive of people she had once loved, or claimed to. Papa stringy, boiled bones brittle, Mama fragrant, kneaded cloves, Sister M to bitter, soaked liver in buttermilk. The words bled through the page. His tongue went dry. He flipped faster, heart screaming, fingers desperate. Near the end, a single line, centered, underlined twice. Warner, sweet, unaware, needs aging. The ink was still fresh. Warner staggered back, breath knocked from his lungs. Every shadow in the kitchen darkened. Every corner leaned toward him. She had been planning it. He was next. But unlike the others, Warner had seen too much, had stayed too long. He couldn't eat another bite, couldn't kiss her goodnight and wonder what flavor she thought he'd become. Slipped a notebook into his coat. He wasn't sure where he'd go, but he knew one thing: he would not stay for dinner. The next morning, Warner Rhodes packed a bag. Not much, just clothes, cash, and the notebook. The house was quiet. Eta was humming in the next room, folding linens. The tune never changed. Soft, sweet, almost sacred. But now it coiled in his ears like a warning. He kept his face calm, his voice light. Asked about preserves, about town gossip, about planting lemon balm near the gate. She smiled, answered gently, even touched his shoulder once with affection. He tried not to flinch. Later that day, he visited the preacher's archives, an old room behind the chapel, full of brittle hymnals and ledger books that smelled like damp paper and forgotten prayers. He looked up the wedding registry. Nothing. No record of their marriage. No signature in A.T.A. May's hand. It was as if the vows they spoke had dissolved into air the moment they were uttered. He searched for obituaries, funeral announcements. Francine Wells, A.T.A.'s sister, May Beth, even Reverend Clark. Nothing. Not even whispers. No lines of grief in the Ridge ledger. No church bells rung in mourning. As if none of them had ever been real. He sat with the silence. Let it press against his chest until it ached. That evening she made dinner, meat stew and warm cornbread. The scent filled the kitchen, savory and nostalgic. He sat across from her, spoon hovering above his bowl. Watched her smile, ladle herself none, watched how she waited for him to eat. He didn't, not that night. Instead, he said he felt tired. Headache, maybe. She hummed softly and reached for a jar labeled chamomile sage. I'll make you a tea, she offered, voice silky. He declined. Claimed he needed only sleep. Her eyes lingered a moment too long. Then, with a nod, she placed the jar back on the shelf. Warner didn't sleep. He walked the property again that night. The wind moved through the garden like a whisper. Trees stood crooked like listeners. He passed the shed, then paused by the magnolia tree, the place she never touched but always visited. The soil still pulsed, not warm now, but hot. Almost breathing. When he reached the porch, he found her waiting. Ata stood barefoot, wrapped in her shawl. Her face was unreadable, calm but stretched tight. You shouldn't walk alone, love, she said. There are snakes in the grass. Warner nodded, tried to smile, went inside. The next morning his boots were scrubbed clean, still damp, placed neatly beside the bed. He didn't remember removing them later. That week Warner stopped by the library. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe hope, maybe proof. Miss Cora, the librarian, greeted him with her usual warm eyes. He told her he was researching the town's early 1930s classes, a personal history project. She didn't ask questions. He found it in a file marked Class of 1932, a black and white photo of schoolgirls on the steps of the old schoolhouse. 10 girls, all in dresses with stiff collars and bows in their hair. There she was, young ATA, still poised, unblinking even as a child. Her stillness pulled at the eyes. Beside her stood another girl, wide grin, arms looped around Ata's like they were stitched together. Underneath the photo, names had been penciled in. Ita Mai Langley, Francine Wells, Mai. Beth Langley. Warner whispered the names aloud. Francine. Her name again. It echoed like a forgotten song. He checked the town census from 1930. Francine Wells, age 10, lived with her grandmother on Malbury Lane, 1940. Nothing, no address, no death record, no marriage license, no obituary, not even a forwarding stamp. Vanished. That night, by the fire, Warner waited. Etta poured herself a glass of blackberry cordial and settled into her chair. He watched her movements like a man waiting to be bitten. I saw an old-school photo today, he said lightly. You and a girl named Francine Wells. You two seemed close. Etta didn't respond at first. Then something in her eyes flickered. She smiled. Oh, Francine, she murmured. She moved north. Married a doctor, I believe, Cincinnati. We lost touch after the war. Her answer was smooth. Too smooth. Like a practiced lullaby. Warner tilted his head. Anyone in town ever hear from her? She shook her head slowly. Eyes distant. She was always restless. Didn't belong here. The firelight flickered across her face, casting her features in strange relief. Like a mask beginning to slip. He didn't press further, but something inside him shifted again. Next day, Warner found Harold Tubbs Binns, the old postman who'd walked the town for 4 decades. He brought up Francine's name casually, pretending to be writing a family history book. Harold scratched his beard. Francine Wells, haven't heard that name in a long time. Lived with her gran. Used to race her dog down Mulberry Lane after school. Buck. That was the dog. Smart thing. Do you remember her moving away? Warner asked. Tubbs frowned. Moving? No, sir. One day she just stopped showing up. That dog of hers cried outside her house for 3 straight days. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. Then he disappeared too. He shook his head. Darndest thing. That night, Warner sat alone in the attic, the class photo and the bracelet on the floor beside him. He stared at them for hours. Francine Wells, missing a dog, missing a cellar, sealed a garden, breathing his wife, humming. Warner began to suspect. He wasn't living inside a love story at all. He was inside a recipe, and the oven was warming. In the days that followed, Warner stopped pretending to sleep. At night, he sat by the kitchen window in the dark, listening. Sometimes it was the wind, low and restless. Other times it was something else, a dragging sound from beneath the floorboards, a single creak of the porch swing when no one was near it. Once, just before dawn, he could have sworn he heard someone whisper his name, Warner, soft as breath, from outside the glass. But when he opened the curtain, there was nothing but his garden staring back. He began visiting the local archive more frequently, digging deeper into names that kept rising like ghosts. Francine Wells, May Beth Langley, Reverend Clark. Nothing. Again and again, they left no trail, not even a whisper in the county death records. He turned to the old church registries, handing records of baptisms and burials, but their names weren't there either, not even his. There was no record of Warner Rhodes ever marrying May Langley. No proof he even existed in Dovetail Ridge. It was as if she were erasing him in real time, and he was beginning to vanish from the page. He started watching the garden. Every morning Etta rose early and moved through her plants like a ghost with purpose. The hydrangeas got water first, then the rosemary, then the basil. It was always in that order, but there was one spot always the same, beneath the magnolia tree, where she didn't plant anything at all. She never weeded it, never touched it, except to kneel, just kneel, and place her hand on the soil. Never moved, never prayed, never dug, she just sat still, palm pressed to the earth like she was listening to something below. That spot was always moist, even in the harshest sun. Even when the well ran dry. One morning, after she'd left to pick up cloth sacks in town, Warner approached the patch with a shovel. He hesitated only once, hand trembling. Then he dug. Just 1 layer deep. The smell hit him, rich and strange. Not rot, not death, something aged, sweet, like overripe fruit. Soaking in iron, he pressed his palm into the dirt. It was warm again, and it pulsed. He reeled back, dropped the shovel, and nearly fell. The ground beneath his wife's favorite tree was alive, not metaphorically alive. That night, as Etta set the table, she watched him with those still eyes. The fire crackled low behind her. Her hair was pinned back, her dress clean, her apron stitched with small violets, always violets. You've been distracted, she said sweetly, resting one hand on his chest. He tried to steady his breathing. Do you miss your old life? Warner gave a dry laugh. No, just tired, I guess. She tilted her head, studying him like an unfinished painting. I could make you a tea, she said. Something to help you sleep. He smiled with his lips, but not his eyes. No need, I'll be fine. She stared for a moment longer, then nodded, the smile returning like a curtain falling on a stage. Then she hummed that same slow lullaby and walked into the pantry. Warner's heart hammered in his chest. At the next morning, he went back to the preacher's archives, hands shaking. He asked to see the baptism records again, this time going back to the 1920s. He searched for Francine, Wells once more. Nothing. Nothing. Then he asked Miss Della one last time. The preacher's wife, now half blind and half memory. Do you remember Francine Wells? He asked gently. Miss Della nodded slowly. Francine and Eta were thick as thieves, always giggling, always sneaking off. She paused, her voice softening. But something changed that year. Eta started wearing gloves all the time, even to the river. And Francine, Miss Della's mouth tightened. We stopped seeing her altogether. No goodbye, no funeral, just gone. Her voice lowered. Things grow differently around 80 May, she whispered. Some things shouldn't grow at all. That night, Warner waited until ATA went out to visit the church pantry, a charity drive she volunteered for once a month. But this time, she left something behind. The cellar key, hanging on its old hook by the back door, left like an invitation, or a trap. He stared at it for an hour before moving. When he opened the cellar door again, the air felt even heavier, colder, but more alive. He stepped down slowly, flashlight beam trembling. Everything was exactly where it had been. The shelves of jars, the butcher's table, except one thing, the barrel. The lid was back on, but something new was there, half hidden behind a flour sack. A small white glove, child-sized, near it. He found a rusted dog tag, wedged behind a dusty crate. Buckwalk, mouth went dry. He remembered the postman's words. That old dog of hers cried for days. Then he disappeared too. He stared at the glove, at the tag, at the shadows beyond the shelves. Then slowly, without taking anything else, he backed up the stairs. When he reached the kitchen, ATA was there, setting the table, not looking at him. Her voice was light. Did you find what you were looking for? Warner forced a smile. Not yet. The rain came down in thick, punishing sheets. By the time Warner's truck turned down the narrow road toward Ata's old farmhouse, the wipers could barely keep up. The headlights caught only the nearest trees, their branches clawing the air, like crooked hands. She was gone for the weekend visiting a cousin in Savannah. She'd kissed him sweetly at the door, her smile soft, eyes unreadable. Warner had kissed her back. It tasted like a farewell, or a dare. The farmhouse stood at the end of the lane, a silhouette against the lightning sky. Its windows glowed with the reflection of the storm, but none were lit. The place looked asleep, but not empty. He parked under the black limbs of a pecan tree that hadn't grown fruit in years. The wind bent it sideways like an old man carrying regret. Warner stepped out, boots sinking into wet earth. The key, the one he found taped inside an old cookbook, fit the front door without struggle. It opened with a sigh, as if the house had been waiting. Inside, everything was neat, perfect, preserved, jars lined the walls in rows of amber and crimson, jams, fruits, or what looked like fruit. The labels were hand-lettered, delicate and clean, but it wasn't the jars that unnerved him, it was the silence. It didn't just fill the house, it choked it. Each footstep on the wooden floor felt louder than it should have. Each heartbeat echoed, like it belonged to someone else. He didn't hesitate this time. He walked straight to the cellar door at the end of the hall. The padlock was still there, thick, old, orange, with rust. He raised the crowbar. Once, twice. The third strike split the lock like a bone, and it clattered to the floor, ringing out like a dinner bell. The door opened, the air slithered out. Damp, cold, almost sentient, it touched his skin like breath. Warner stepped into the dark. The stairs creaked beneath his weight. The beam from his flashlight carved a shaky path down the walls, revealing more jars, more shelves. The air was denser here, thick with mildew, spice, and something else. Something rotting, hidden behind sweetness. He moved toward the center table, still clean, still surgical in its emptiness. And then he saw it. The barrel, heavy, sealed, wrong, it. Wood was darker than the others, as if it had soaked something that refused to dry. Rusted metal bands groaned under pressure. He hesitated, then pried it open. The lid came loose with a pop. The smell hit like a slap. Fermented meat, thyme, vinegar. It curdled the air. He gagged, stumbling backward, hand clamped over his mouth. Then, lightning struck outside, just for a second, and the contents of the barrel were illuminated. Bones, small, arranged, tender. He crept closer. Nestled among the bones was something shiny, a bracelet, silver, tarnished. The name engraved in curling script, Francine. Warner dropped it and turned, bile rising again. He bent over in the corner, dry heaving, but his mind wouldn't empty. Not this time. It raced with images, the school photo, the class roll, the missing census records, the jars labeled preserved, the woman beside him in bed who never aged, never ached, never remembered anyone before him. He stood, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. That's when he saw it, a carved message in the wooden beam. Above the barrel, barely visible, etched deep and angry, "Meat is memory." He stared at it for a long time, and suddenly, everything made sense. The recipes she never shared, the pies that neighbors adored, the stews that warmed the soul. They weren't meals, they were elegies. Preservation wasn't about fruit. It was about people. She had kept them. Not as photographs, not as stories, as ingredients. He didn't sleep that night, not even in his own house. He sat at the kitchen table with the shotgun across his lap, the silver bracelet next to the salt. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, but the silence pressed harder now. He couldn't shake the smell of the cellar. It clung to his skin, buried in his nostrils like it had climbed inside him. When dawn came, he stood to wash his face, but something caught his eye again, that uneven floorboard beneath the sink. The one he'd forgotten in the madness. He knelt, pulled it loose. Inside a notebook, wrapped in wax paper, stained with time. It looked like an old recipe journal, but it wasn single quotes. No ingredients, no steps, no instructions. Just names. Francine, soft, tender, smoked. Papa, stringy, boiled bones, too brittle. Mama, fragrant, needed clove. Sister M, too bitter. Liver soaked in buttermilk helped. Each entry read like a butcher's. Tasting notes. He turned the pages with shaking hands. Aunt Lou smelled of mothballs. Stewed Reverend Clark to lean. Use only ribs. Stranger by the well, no name. Perfect cheek meat. Then he reached the final page. There was only one name, centered, underlined. Warner, sweet, unaware, needs aging. The ink was fresh. She had written it recently. He dropped the notebook like it had burned him, stumbling backward until he slammed into the counter. He stood there, breath ragged, the room warping around him. She'd been planning him, tasting him, seasoning him. He had never been a husband. He was a recipe, in progress. Warner didn't run that morning. He couldn't, not because he didn't want to, but because his legs wouldn't move. He sat in the kitchen, dawn leaking through the curtains like watered-down blood. The air smelled like rain, rose water, and something faintly metallic. In front of him sat the notebook, the one that knew his flavor. His name. On the last page. Warner, sweet, unaware, needs aging. He had aged. Alright, he was ripe. He stared at the wall for what felt like hours. Birds chirped outside, impossibly normal. A neighbor waved from a bicycle. The world went on, indifferent. Warner was no longer part of it. He was inventory. He forced himself into motion. The notebook went into his coat. He packed a second bag, cash, papers, and the bracelet. He didn't know where he'd go yet, just away. Anywhere without Peaches. Anywhere she wasn't, but the silence was already breaking him. And the fear, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, calculating, the kind of fear that crawled later that day. Eta returned. She stepped into the house with wind in her hair and a fresh bouquet of herbs in her arms. Her smile was bright, almost glowing. She kissed him lightly on the cheek. I brought thyme and mint, she said. Thought I'd make something fresh tonight. Warner nodded. She didn't mention the storm. She didn't ask what he'd done while she was gone. She didn't need to. Her eyes lingered on him, just a beat too long. Measured him, not like a wife looking at a husband, like a cook testing meat. That night he didn't sleep again. He walked the perimeter of the property until nearly dawn, circling the house like it was a cage. The magnolia tree watched him. The garden pulsed. The cellar whispered. When he returned, she was standing at the back window, staring into the darkness. Her reflection caught his for a split second, and it didn't look like her. It looked like something wearing her skin. The next day, Warner visited Miss Cora at the library again. She'd always been kind, trusted him. He asked for old class records, yearbooks, church bulletins, town newsletters, anything from 1930 to 1940. She smiled, led him to the archives, and left him alone. He found it tucked in a school newsletter, a class photo already familiar. 10 girls, 1 smile. Francine Wells. Eta May Langley. Names penciled beneath their feet, like captions on a gravestone, but there was something different this time. Notes scribbled faintly in the margin. Francine's last known day, July 8, 1936. Warner felt the date burn into his chest. The same week the barn burned. The same week Eta started wearing gloves. The same week the dog disappeared. Everything had started that week. He copied the date into his notebook and circled it 3 times. Then he left the library that evening. Dinner was already on the table when he returned. Stew. It always came back to stew. She ladled him a bowl, smiled, and sipped from her own teacup. Still no food for herself. Still watching. How was the library? She asked. He blinked. Didn't find what I was looking for. She tilted her head. Shame Warner didn't eat. She didn't comment. That night, he found a note tucked under his pillow, her handwriting. Elegant, delicate. Some things are meant to be shared. Others are meant to be preserved. No signature, just the faint scent of lavender and clove on the paper. The next morning he went back to the preacher's archives. One last time. He wasn't sure what he was searching for anymore. Just answers, or closure, or proof that he hadn't imagined it all. He asked Miss Della about Francine again. She sighed deeply. Her face had grown hollow over the years, but her eyes were still sharp. She and Eta were close, she whispered. Too close. What do you mean? Della looked away. I think Francine was the only person who ever saw all of her. The only one who could. Warner leaned in. Do you think something happened to her? Miss Della's voice dropped low. I think she said no. Warner froze. No to what? Della shook her head. Does it matter? He stared at her, a lump forming in his throat. It matters to me. Della hesitated. Then let me ask you this. Do you love her? Yes, he whispered. I think I still do. She smiled sadly. Then you already know too much. That's the price of loving, Eta May. That night, Warner opened the pantry. The notebook was gone. The glove gone. The bracelet gone. Only the jars remained. A dozen of them now, neatly labeled. Peaches, okra, beets, pears. Each one identical. Each one sealed. Each one watching. He opened one, handshaking. Inside, slices of pear floated in syrup. Soft. Pale. Too pale. Too perfect. He dropped it. It shattered on the floor like a bone breaking from the hallway. She called sweetly. Did something fall? Warner stared at the broken glass. And, Warner began moving differently now, not out of fear but calculation. He didn't flinch at her touch. He didn't hesitate when she asked him to pass the salt or tie the herb bundles. He smiled when she smiled, nodded when she hummed. He was learning to blend in with her quiet, like a man learning to survive inside a painting. Because he finally understood. Eta May didn't live in the world. She preserved it. She froze moments, pickled people, cured the past into glass jars. Unforgettable whispers. She didn't just erase stories, she sealed them shut with sugar and silence. And now, she was preparing to preserve him too. He had no proof. No body, no trail. But he had the truth. And that was heavier than any evidence. He began pretending harder. At dinner he ate. Only small bites, enough to keep the mask on, enough to keep the notebook from becoming prophecy, she noticed. Of course she did. Your appetite's faded, she said one evening, placing a napkin in his lap. Work's been heavy, he lied. Let me make you something special tomorrow. I'd like that. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm, her eyes were calm. He didn't pull away. That night, she dreamed in whispers. He woke in the dark, heart racing, as she mumbled something soft beside him, not words, but syllables, repeating, rhythmic, like a chant. He watched her lips move in the moonlight. Then she smiled. Still asleep, Warner turned away. He didn't sleep again. 2 days later, the mail arrived, a rare event in Dovetail Ridge, mostly bills or church announcements, but this time, a small brown package sat at the bottom of the bundle. No return address, just his name, hand-lettered in perfect cursive. Inside, a jar. Glass. Thick, syrup inside, red-tinged, too dark for peach. No label, just a note tucked beneath it. Yours. He didn't open it, didn't throw it away either. He placed it with the others in the back of the closet, behind his winter coat and an old suitcase. 8 jars, then 9. Now 10, lined like silent mourners. He stared at them for a long time, then closed the door. Later that evening, while Eta hummed in the pantry, Warner slipped out to the porch. The night air smelled like rain and rosemary. A storm was pacing nearby, waiting for its cue. He stared into the woods behind their home, the garden, the tree, the dark beyond. He still heard the hums sometimes from deep in the magnolia roots. Like a memory rising through the soil, he thought about the cellar. The bones, the carving, meet his memory. He whispered the phrase to himself now, like a curse, like a prayer. He remembered Francine. Her wide smile in that photo. The way Eta's arms wrapped around her like possession. He remembered the name scratched into the cellar wall. Desperate and final. And now his name was in a book, not as a husband, as an ingredient. The next day, he walked into town. He didn't tell Eta. Said he needed oil for the truck, a belt, something mechanical and manly. He stopped by the corner store, spoke with Harold Tubbs Binns again, the postman. Pretended to be working on family records, tracing stories. I keep finding mentions of Francine, Warner said casually. Harold scratched his chin. Pretty girl, smart, fast runner. Never seen a kid race a dog like that. She moved away, right? The old man squinted. No, I mean, people say that. But I never saw no luggage, no farewells. Warner leaned in. Did anyone? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Warner would never forget. She left the dog behind. Buck. That dog howled for 3 days. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. Then he vanished too. Warner's stomach twisted. He thanked him and left. That night he didn't sit at the dinner table. He stayed in the workshop. Sharpened a knife he hadn't used in months. Not her paring blades. Not the one she touched. One he kept from Charleston. An old hunting knife. Heavy, worn, clean. When she knocked on the door and asked, "Are you coming to eat?" he called back gently. Later, she didn't ask twice, but she stayed on the other side of the door for several minutes. He could feel it later. As he walked past the hallway mirror, he caught his own reflection. He didn't recognize the man staring back, not because he looked afraid, but because he didn't. He looked ready. That night, Ita sat beside him on the porch, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes soft. "The garden's doing well," she said. "It always does," Warner replied. She smiled. "I'm glad you came here, Warner. I used to be lonely. Now I'm not." "I'm glad to," he said. He meant it. Somewhere beneath the fear, the horror, the unanswered questions, he still loved her. Or maybe he loved the idea of her. The calm, the quiet, the illusion of peace. But now he knew better. She didn't offer peace. She offered preservation, and that was worse, because it came in kisses, in stew, in jars, before they went to bed. She placed a sealed container on the kitchen counter. "Tomorrow's supper," she said. Then she leaned in, kissed his forehead. "Good night, my love." When she turned, he saw it in her hand, the silver key to the cellar. She didn't try to hide it. She just walked away, humming. The storm rolled in just past midnight, slow and mean, dragging its weight across the sky like a preacher with bad news. Rain tapped at the windows in uneven rhythms. The trees bent, not from wind, but from the heaviness in the air. Warner waited. He had packed what he could, the notebook, the jars, the hunting knife. The truck was fueled. The cellar key was tucked into his boot. He hadn't told a soul, because who would believe him, that his wife was a curator of bodies, preserver of memories, a woman who whispered lullabies to bones. Still, he hesitated at the door, not because he feared her, but because part of him still impossibly wanted to stay. It was love, perhaps, or madness, or both. Then she stepped into the doorway like she had been summoned by thought alone. Barefoot, nightgown, brushing her ankles like fog. Her hands were empty, but her presence wasn't. Ata made art as beautiful and still as she'd ever been. But now, Warner saw the sharpness beneath the sweetness. Now he saw the teeth. "I know," he said quietly, voice barely rising above the storm outside. She tilted her head. "I know what you did." She didn't blink, didn't flinch. "You went into the cellar," she said softly. "You left me no choice." Her voice was gentle, almost maternal. She stepped onto the porch, her feet silent on the wood, one hand resting on the railing, the other out of sight. "I did it out of love," she whispered, "to keep them with me. Mama, Papa, Francine. I couldn't let them leave. You ever felt that, Warner? That ache when someone leaves and takes a part of you with them?" His jaw clenched. "They didn't leave, Ata. You took them." Her smile was calm, patient. "And I never let them go." He stepped back, just enough to feel the damp night air at his back, just enough to know he still had time to run. "Put it down," he said. She didn't move, didn't pretend, didn't lie. Instead, she stepped down one porch stair, her hand now visible holding something small, glinting, a paring knife, the kind she used on peaches. "I never wanted to hurt you, Warner," she said. "Not really. You were different. You brought quiet. That's rare, that's precious." He shook his head, pain rising in his throat. "You wrote it down. You wrote that I needed aging. That's not love." She took another step. "We age wine, don't we? We season meat. You weren't ready yet. You were still soft in all the wrong ways. But now," she smiled, "you're perfect." He reached slowly for the knife inside his coat. She saw it, didn't panic, didn't pause, just stepped off the last stair, her nightgown dragging through the puddles. Her eyes never left his. "Don't do this," he said, voice shaking. She cocked her head. "I gave you peace. I gave you silence. You never would have found that anywhere else." He held up the hunting knife. "You gave me silence like a hunter gives it to a rabbit." For the first time, something flickered in her face. Not fear, not guilt, sadness. "I could have made something beautiful from you," she said. Something lasting, something tender. She stepped forward again, raising the paring knife. You'll never ask the right questions. That was the moment. The air split. The rain vanished behind the sound of his own heartbeat, and Warner ran not toward her, not into her arms, but away, down the steps. Across the garden, through the wet black trees that twisted like broken fingers. His breath tore through his chest. Branches clawed his face. He didn't stop, not even when silence followed him. Not footsteps, not pursuit. It scared him more, because she wasn't chasing him. She didn't have to. He collapsed behind a fallen pine, mud caking his hands, lungs screaming. The woods closed in. The earth felt soft beneath him, too soft. He stared into the dark. No movement, no sound, no blade in his back. Just her voice, echoing in his mind. Meat is memory, but so is heartbreak. That broke him, not because it was twisted, but because it was true. He still loved her, even now, even here. That's what made it unbearable. Not the horror, not the cellar, not the notebook, but that he loved her, and part of him still wanted her to love him back. Back at the house, she stood alone on the porch. Knife by her side, her nightgown fluttering in the wind. No anger in her face, no fear, just stillness. She whispered something, not for Warner to hear, but for the wind, for the ghosts, for the cellar beneath her feet. Then she turned and walked inside, her footsteps soft, measured, like someone walking a path they'd walked 100 times before. Warner stayed in the woods until the rain stopped, until the sky turned pale. Until his legs remembered how to carry him again. Then he stood, walked to the truck and drove. He didn't pack, didn't say goodbye. He left with nothing but the coat on his back and the notebook in his pocket and the memory of a voice that could slice him open without a knife. Warner Roads never returned to Dovetail Ridge. He drove until the trees no longer looked like listeners and the air no longer smelled like peaches. He crossed 3 state lines and changed his name somewhere near Roanoke, bought a bookstore no one visited and an apartment above it that was too quiet. Even for him, he stopped cooking, stopped going to church, stopped writing. But he never forgot, because some love stories don't end with a kiss, some end with a lid twisted shut. In the years that followed, jars arrived at his post office box, always wrapped in brown paper, no return address. No note. Just a single glass jar, filled with something glistening, beets, okra, pears floating in syrup that smelled like flowers and rain. The handwriting on the label was always the same, elegant, soft, familiar, preserved. He never opened them, but he never threw them away, either. He lined them up in the back of his closet, behind wool coats and broken memories. 8 jars, then 9, then 10, each one a silent witness, each one a warning or maybe a promise. Sometimes late at night, when wind whispered through the bookstore walls, Warner would sit on the edge of his bed, listening. If the storm was just right, if the air was just damp enough, he could smell her rose, water. Time. And something metallic beneath it all. He once thought about sending the jars to the police. But what would he say? That a woman who vanished in smoke was mailing him vegetables and syrup. That every sealed lid was a ghost waiting to breathe. No one would believe him. And the truth? He wasn't sure he wanted them to. Because some truths once spoken don't fit back in their jars. They say A.T.A. May died in that fire. The farmhouse burned to the ground 2 weeks after Warner left. Locals say it went up like dry kindling, no sign of struggle. No sign of her. The sheriff and his deputies found nothing but ash and a blackened cellar door buried beneath the rubble. No body. No bones. Just smoke and soot. And unease. In the weeks that followed, people started whispering. A woman in a white coat seen at a roadside diner in Montgomery, asking a trucker what his mother used to cook for his birthday. A red-haired nurse at a hospital in Selma who worked one night shift, then never clocked in again. A market vendor in Mobile selling fig preserves that tasted just like Mama's until she vanished before her second Sunday. Different stories. Same eyes. Same smile. Same stillness. Warner kept living. Technically he sold books by day, stacked unopened, jars by night. He never remarried, never learned to sleep deeply, and he never let anyone into his kitchen. One day, many years later, another jar arrived. 5 years had passed since the last. He knew it before he unwrapped it. This one was heavier. The syrup inside was darker, almost red, the contents unrecognizable. The label wasn't her usual. This one had a single word, underlined twice. Yours. He sat with it for an hour, then placed it with the others. Didn't open it, didn't speak, didn't sleep that night. The jars stayed there until the end of his life. A decade passed, then more. People forgot about Warner Roads. The bookstore went to auction. The apartment was cleared. That's when someone found the jars. No labels, no clue, no reason, just silence, trapped in syrup. The man cataloging the items noted that the seals were perfect, untouched, preserved, sometimes. When the wind shifts through quiet towns in Georgia or Alabama, folks still speak her name, a warning, a whisper, a recipe passed down without ingredients. 8. May Langley. She's not in the records, but she's in the memory. And memory, after all, is the most tender meat of all.